everyone. Happy Earth Day, and thanks for tuning in today. I am Nicole Forbes with Genesis 70s, and today we are talking about small trees for your garden. And that is really trees that mature at 20 feet tall or smaller. Now, in kind of preparation for this class and in just kind of thinking about the topic in general, one of the things that I want to begin with in the discussion is what makes a tree a tree? And I know that that sounds like a funny question, but when we talk about something as general as the concept of a tree in your garden, we could be talking about something that is 50, 60, 100 feet tall, which is so tall in your garden that it might even just kind of look like a telephone pole. Some of us have Douglas firs that are 100 feet tall or 75 feet tall in our gardens, but when we're actually near them, we don't see the tree itself because it's so large. We just see a big trunk. But trees also can be small, more ornamental trees. Of course, one of the best known for the Pacific Northwest is our Japanese maples. And the upright style of Japanese maples are a classic example of a smaller garden tree that is found to be appropriate in, front yard plantings, even parking strip type plantings, as well as, patios and even for container plantings. Maybe not long term, but depending on the container size, Japanese maples, for example, are a great choice for container trees. Now, in talking with my husband, who is a non-gardener type, his idea of what a tree is varied quite significantly from my concept of a tree. And so that really, again, made me realize that we all may be thinking of different things when we talk about trees. I want to kind of come to terms with a broad definition. Trees are generally an upright, either rounded or vase-shaped plant in the garden that has a woody structure, so woody trunk, woody base to it, that develops some bark, and the shape of the tree can either be single trunk with a upper canopy, or some of our well-known trees are actually multi-trunked to give a maybe 3 or 4 trunks coming up at once to give kind of a nice wide appearance of the tree. So single trunk or multi-trunk, they could still be considered a tree. But the height consideration of what really makes a tree is that we're talking about a minimum height for most standard trees of approximately 20 feet and up. So when we say I want a small tree for the garden and we want something that's about 6 feet tall, we're really thinking we want the shape and kind of effect of a tree, but we aren't always talking about a traditional tree. Now, there are varieties of trees that have been bred to be smaller. There are dwarf varieties of trees, and all the time breeders are working to kind of, select and provide us with a series of trees that fit into our ever smaller backyards, or the constrictions of street plantings or curb strip type plantings where you've got overhead power lines, for example, which often there is a height restriction for those curb strip plantings because of the lines overhead. So although, again, there are shorter versions of taller trees that would be dwarf, those aren't always available. The kind of availability of the internet shows that, you know, there's a lot of different choices out there, but really when it comes down to walking in and purchasing something in reality, that special select form of dwarf dogwood that you read about on the internet, for example, just may not be that common or available. So, to make it easy on all of us, on making a tree selection, I've kind of listed out some of my favorite, I don't know, half a dozen, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 10, my favorite 10 or so trees, 15?
13.
All right. And so, when we, again, want a tree that is shorter than 20 feet, we're really talking about a tree, right? So we want the tree look, the tree effect, but it's more likely that we will be growing a shrub, and rather than allowing that shrub to become full and rounded and encourage a lot of thick growth at the bottom, training a shrub to have a little bit of a trunk, and even identifying maybe a single stalk or one or two main trunks that you want to create that structure, and pruning up the bottom to give it the look of more of a tree is appropriate for a lot of our shrubs, and many of them are even well suited to it or are already started in that kind of growth habit. So when we look at, and just to kind of talk about how trees grow and how we would identify a shrub that would make a good tree specimen over time, I always like to remind you, there's a handout attached to the description of this video. So right up at the top, you can click on the handout, and that's going to go through the list of the trees that I am kind of talking about today. Naturally, I only brought in the most portable trees to our break room / video classroom area here today. So really, I brought in the smallest trees that we have in small containers that are easy to move around and carry. Many of the trees that are on the list, I chose to leave where they are because they're large already, 6, 7 feet or more, and on the heavy side. So come and visit. We'll be adding photos to the blog that accompanies this class, and to check availability at our different garden centers, because the trees we carry range from store to store. You can always go to shop.dennis7ds.com and see live availability on these trees at our different garden center locations. So that being said, I'm going to look at 2 different candidates for small trees in your garden. One is a traditional tree, and the other is more of a shrub that we're going to encourage to grow into a tree. So the more traditional tree and again back to that lovely upright Japanese maple that I was talking about. Many of us are more familiar with the Japanese maple that grows like a little mushroom or an umbrella. That's a lace leaf Japanese maple with more of a weeping or kind of cascade habit. They tend to be as wide as they are tall, although they can develop kind of the same, effect of a trunk and a canopy. Usually they're pruned to kind of show the beautiful structure of the zigzaggy, crooked branches inside, and they develop a pretty wide canopy, and they're not anything that you would necessarily consider a shade tree or walk under or that kind of thing. The other style of Japanese maples are the Acer palmatums. This is a upright Japanese maple called Gable Glory, but there are hundreds and hundreds of cultivars of upright Japanese maples or Acer palmatums. Their size range can be up to 30, 35 feet or so for some of the largest of them, which include maybe the Bloodgood varieties, for example, and the standard Acer palmatum itself. But the cultivars, including Gable Glory here, oops, I'm losing my mic. of ours, including Gable Glory, can be anywhere from even like 6-8 feet tall on to 12 to 15 feet tall. So Gable Glory here is in that 12 to 15 feet tall category. They are moderate growers, although some varieties grow faster than others. And now this is 12 to 15 feet tall and wide. But it's going to develop a vase shape over time, as you can see. It's lovely vase shape. And the vase shape means that it's going to be 12 to 15 feet wide at the outer edges of its upper canopy, not necessarily 12 to 15 feet wide at the base. So still being like a tree, we could underplant it with some other shade-loving shrubs or perennials to kind of create that tiered landscape in our homes. But on a tree such as this, I can't raise it up too much without hitting the ceiling, but on a tree such as this traditional tree, and how trees grow, is that trees grow from the top, not from the bottom. And I don't know if that makes sense or if you understand what I'm trying to say, but this spot on this trunk will always be here at this trunk, and this spot won't necessarily travel up the trunk. It doesn't grow out of the soil. It grows out of the top of the tree. So whereas vines and some other things that we see kind of seem to push up out of the soil, the way that trees grow is more from the tips and from the outer extremities. Now, often on young trees, we also have some lower branches that are further down on the trunk that over time may be removed, but are important on juvenile trees that they stay where they are, and that you only remove those branches kind of slowly and as the tree matures, because the positioning of the lowest branches on a tree will often help the tree trunk itself develop a proper taper at the top, and the taper has a lot to do with the kind of, support and stability over time. So anything that, snaps off in the wind or ice storm, for example, may have not developed the taper that was appropriate to support that tree in those kinds of conditions. Now, a shrub, got in the way, no. A shrub, such as this Cotinus grace, this is a smoke tree. Sometimes it's called a smoke bush, but a smoke tree is really more of a large shrub that can be pruned into a small tree. And as we look at it here, and it's really a cool plant. It's got this purple burgundy foliage that lasts into the summer, and then it turns brilliant rainbow colors for fall. And the reason it's called a smoke tree is that it has these kind of unusual plumy flower seed heads that kind of look like a haze of smoke above the plant when it's in bloom in late spring or early summer. So if we look at the smoke tree here, we see that it's got two main stems that are coming out of the ground, and its branches off in those two main stems pretty low to the ground. And then it has a few other branches from the base that we could prune off and encourage these two main stems to develop as the primary structure of a multi-trunked tree in this sense. So removing this lower branch here, and over time maybe even removing this one here, and as it grows from the top, these will get thicker and develop that main low branched structure that would create a wide tree with that multi-trunked form. Now, smoke trees can get up to about 12 to 15 feet tall and nearly as wide, but it's not, because we have this multi-trunked, multi-topped format, it's also easy to prune on something such as this Whereas we're often, told never top a tree, it's different when we are essentially topping a shrub because we don't have that central leader that gives us the form of straight up and then the branches kind of proportionally following it. So different format gives us also that more free pruning ability, which again, if you're concerned with keeping it at 12 feet and not 15 feet, certainly something that's easier to accomplish. But again, similar to how I was saying how the maple grows, it's growing from the top. It's not growing from the base down here. So we start with this structure, and then that's the structure that we will have as the tree develops. It may grow a couple of new sprouts from around the roots, but again, we have the ability to prune those out if we wanted to identify and maintain that two main trunk look of the multi-trunked smoke tree. Now, there are lines of trees that, as I mentioned, are being developed by breeders that are fitting into our smaller spaces. So in many cases, even the trees on the list that I've given you, there's an even smaller or a dwarf cultivar that is either recently developed or is in development. And one really cool one that we have today that's not on your list, and like I said, all stores differ in their inventory, but I'm here in Lake Oswego, and while I was walking around looking at trees today, I found a jade butterflies ginkgo. And the jade butterflies ginkgo is a gorgeous tree that gets about 12 to 15 feet tall and almost as wide. And a ginkgo leaf, many of us are familiar with the kind of unusual fan shape of a ginkgo leaf. And now these leaves will get larger, but not quite as large as a standard sized ginkgo tree. Ginkgos also turn just beautiful bright yellow gold in the fall before they drop their leaves. So jade butterflies is a dwarf, kind of densely branched variety of ginkgo that's going to give us sort of a vase-shaped plant in the as it matures. It would be fine in a container, and like I said, it does drop its leaves. Truly stunning in the fall when it turns colors, but even before that, it's really just a lovely tree that is small scale for your garden, and it's sort of a new introduction because our standard ginkgo trees can get 40, 50 or more feet tall and wide. So something that most of us have not had the space for in our gardens until coming across, a dwarf variety. Now, vine maples, again, a native maple for the Pacific Northwest. Acer circinatum is a great small tree that is usually found as a multi-trunked tree. If you're walking around in Forest Park or taking a hike in really most of our kind of natural areas here in the Willamette Valley, you will see the vine maples growing as one of our kind of standard understory trees. They grow under and in that filtered light or shade of the taller trees like the Douglas firs, the big leaf maples, those kinds of guys. So a vine maple is great in dappled sun or shade, but it can also tolerate some sun. Here's a young vine maple, just a great plant to get started. We can see here it's got 3 good stems that are coming out of the ground, and they're a little close together. So over time you could either try to stake them out to give them a little bit of space, or the plant will probably develop its own, wider shape over time to allow all of these branches to get a little bit more exposure to the sun. But a good starter plant on vine maples, ultimately getting up to about 12 to 20 feet tall and wide. A lot of our concept of trees, again, and shade trees or flowering trees, most of them are deciduous, meaning that they drop their leaves in the winter. Fall color is a great consolation prize for the fact that it's going to be bare through the winter. So it goes out with a bang in many cases, as a lot of our wonderful trees on the list and small garden trees have really pretty fall color before the leaves drop. But there are a few evergreen specimens as well. And you'll see again on your list, I list out a few of the evergreen varieties that are broadleaf evergreen. Now, broadleaf evergreen just means that it's not a needle or a conifer, it's got a wider, broader leaf. So one of probably the most popular and well-known of the small broadleaf evergreen trees, this is in the magnolia family, but this is a evergreen magnolia. And this is a dwarf evergreen magnolia called Little Gem. Little Gem will get again to that 12 to 20 feet tall with about a 10-foot spread. It is kind of a summer blooming, wonderful fragrant summer blooming flower. It's white, so I've got the beginning of a flower up here, but it's gotten a little bit damaged since it's not summer yet. I think it bloomed a little early and is kind of sorry for it. So white flower up here, but we see also the remainder of last year's blooms. So quite a few kind of funky pine coney looking seed pods that show us where the blooms were from last year or the last blooms of last year. This is again kind of a dense tree over time, so it makes a great privacy screen. A really lovely tree for full sun, at least 6 hours of sun. And the standard magnolias can get, again, 40, 50, 60 feet. So Little Gem, a lovely, upright, smaller leafed, but still beautiful flowers form of the evergreen magnolia. And then also on the handout list, you'll see one called Baby Grand, which is even shorter yet. So Baby Grand is a 10-foot tall southern evergreen magnolia. But Baby Grand gets about as wide as it does tall. So it's almost like a magnolia bush rather than a magnolia tree. But Lake Oswego doesn't have any Baby Grands in stock right now, but I believe I saw them at our Cedar Hills location on their inventory. And another fabulous evergreen that's on your list and in my garden, a couple of these are in my garden, but this is a Zara, also known as chin chin tree, I believe. Common names aren't always that common. But a Zara has tiny, deep, dark green leaves compared especially to the size leaf of the evergreen magnolia. Definitely a smaller scale leaf, but still an evergreen. And this Zara is multi-trunked, as you see. So we've got 3 more significant trunks in here, and I would do a little bit of pruning, honestly, to thin out some of the lower trunk and show off that main structure. So prune a couple of these branches and really start identifying more of a tree shape. But a Zara is a partial shade tree as well. It is upright and slightly vase shaped. We're looking at slow to moderate growth on the Azera, does best with partial or filtered sun. So mine is in my parking strip actually, getting morning sun, but kind of protection from the hotter afternoon sun. It is, oh, it made a mess. It is the most fragrant winter blooming tree. Its flowers come out in January or February. They are teeny tiny yellow pom-pom flowers that golden yellow, bright, but small. And they are highly fragrant and smell somewhere between chocolate and vanilla, like you've just put your face in a bakery door, or in the window of like mom's homemade cookie kitchen. They are a wonderful smell, but again, bloom so early in the season that you need to kind of be out there or be near it to have that aroma. January, February, we don't even really usually have our windows cracked unless, you know, um, for a special occasion or something. So the fragrance is lovely, but it tends to be a time of year that you may or may not even notice it. It is a gorgeous broadleaf evergreen tree for sun to partial sun, and again, this is a multi-trunk form, but they also are available in single trunk, or we could even train this one to ultimately have a single trunk and look more like a traditional tree if we wanted. So another broadleaf evergreen here, Azera microphylla. And then a non-broadleaf evergreen, a conifer. There are a lot of dwarf conifers. This is one of my favorites. She's named Blue Angel. Blue Angel is a form of Japanese white pine. Blue Angel is, again, a dwarf form of the Japanese white pine, so other white pines will get slightly larger than Blue Angel. You can see why. She's got the blue part of her name, so a pretty kind of silver gray to the leaves, to the needles. New growth is coming out at all of the points here, and because she's a pine, the new growth looks like little fingers, or what we call candles. Although Blue Angel is already a small tree, 7 to 8 feet tall by about 3 to 4 feet wide, so a perfect little upright kind of conifer accent in the garden without casting shade or creating a big canopy. It's just a nice upright tree. It tends to create cones when it's young, so we have the interest right now of some beautiful cones. I'll try to get it a little closer. See, it's adorable little cones forming here. And if you wanted to slow the growth of a pine, and even on something like the Blue Angel, we have the ability at this time in its growth stage to remove an entire season's worth of growth by just pulling it off with your fingers. So by snapping or breaking off the candles at the top here, we can, and they're still soft, so they break easily, but eventually they'll get harder and woodier, and they won't be as easy to break off. So you can remove some or all, for example, of the candles on your tree every other year to even further slow the growth and kind of restrict the tree's ultimate size. When it is a pine specifically, we have that ability because of this unique kind of way that they grow. So Blue Angel, just a beautiful conifer for a small garden space, does again best in full sun. Pretty little blue accents. And, where am I? Magnolia. So crepe myrtle is another fantastic small garden tree. And crepe myrtles are, they're not yet out at the garden centers. Crepe myrtles aren't even yet out. They haven't broken dormancy from winter. So crepe myrtles do best in full, hot sun. They're not going to be a shade tree or even a partial shade tree. Crepe myrtles are going to flower at least best for you when they're exposed to south or southwest 6-8 hours of sun or more. And as I said, crepe myrtles are a blooming tree, so they give us late summer and into fall flowers usually. They look like crepe paper in kind of collected bundles, which is why the name crepe myrtle. And the flowers are in like hot pink, magenta, lilac, lavender, white, sometimes a red. And as I mentioned, they're just heat loving, but they also develop beautiful fall color when they're in that full sun exposure. And many of the varieties, although they do drop their leaves in the winter, so they're not amongst the evergreens, as they do fall color and their leaf drop, they also have a kind of a patchy or decorative bark appearance. So winter interest, which for a tree tends to be cool looking bark, definitely also you would see in the crepe myrtles. But because crepe myrtles feature is so late summer and fall, they bloom late, their leaves are fantastic late, they also kind of sleep in the spring. So they wake up late and they don't leaf out as early as many other trees do. So it may not be the best like front garden tree, for example, or specimen tree in the middle of your front yard, because it looks like your tree's dead right now when most of the other trees in the neighborhood have leafed out. If they aren't crepe myrtles, your crepe myrtle is still bare, and it definitely makes you worry and wonder. We get phone calls every year at the garden center by a concerned owner of a late sleeping crepe myrtle who, people want to know for sure that it's dead or alive, and we just tell them to wait. Give it a little bit more time and it's gonna leaf out. So just a word about crepe myrtles and their funny little habits. I don't, like I said, have them in yet because they don't really have leaves, so we tend to carry things at the garden center that look, like somebody wants to buy them, not something that looks a little dead right now. Stay tuned though, we'll be getting lots of crepe myrtles in. And I do list some great varieties based off of size, sticking in that 20-foot range. But there are a good selection of crepe myrtles that are quite shorter, so even 8 to 10 feet tall, and a whole series of crepe myrtles that are petite. And that would be like 3, 5, even 7 feet tall. So look for the petite series, petite plum, petite pink, petite series, if you're looking for something that's really, shorter than me. But for a larger tree crepe myrtle, in most cases, again, they're grown as shrubs with multi-trunks and allowed to grow taller. But occasionally you can find the crepe myrtles in a single trunk form as well. Elderberries are another one of those large shrubs that we grow into kind of tree form. And elderberries grow quite quickly. So I didn't bring any in here today, but the Sambucus black lace has a leaf that looks a lot like a Japanese maple, kind of a dark finger style leaf. It makes a really pretty pinkish white flower cluster in the late spring summer, but we're talking about a tree that grows twice as fast as a Japanese maple and ends up more as a wide bush, about as wide as it is tall, just woody and a little bit more open in structure. Now again, you can prune to create more of a single stalk or single trunk and define an upper canopy on a Sambucus or elderberry, or you can allow it to have its own kind of natural, more rounded shape. Really up to you and kind of how you want to maintain it in the long run. There are dogwoods that, again, we list a couple of varieties of dogwoods that stay under 20 feet, but dogwoods are generally slow growing trees. So when we see small trees in the neighborhood and they look like they're only, 10 feet or 12 feet, chances are really good that they're actually just not grown to maturity yet. So they are still smaller trees than they ultimately will be. An average dogwood can be between 12 and 20 feet, but then that's within like a 10-year time span. So the long-term growth, as the tree slowly develops its mature height, could even be on up to 25 or 30 feet for quite a few of our dogwood varieties. Satomi, which is a beautiful pink dogwood that blooms. We have a group of dogwoods blooming right now, but Satomi belongs to a group of dogwoods that'll be blooming in another month or so. So Satomi pink is a beautiful small dogwood, stays in about that 20-foot size range. And then there is a variegated dogwood variety that is just starting to leaf out called Wolf Eyes, which has this green and kind of creamy white edge to the leaf. a white flower, and again, wolf eyes stays quite small in landscapes. And dogwoods do best with sun to partial sun, so a little bit of filtered light or morning sun, and then afternoon kind of protection or shade from the hot afternoon. Wolf eyes ends up at like 10 to 20 feet tall and could be about as wide as well. Redbuds blooming right now here at the garden center is Merlot redbud. Merlot is only about a 12-foot tall tree, but again, about as wide. So at 12 feet tall, I can reach to 7.5 feet with the tip of my fingers. So I know, for example, that my ceiling is 8.5 feet tall. When you are trying to imagine in your garden height on different things, I would recommend, if you're trying to figure out what 12 feet tall will look like, hold a broomstick in your hands. For example, if you can hold an average of 7 feet with your hand, then put a 5-foot broom handle in your hand, then you'll have a good sense of what 12 feet of what that kind of average wolf-eyes dogwood size would be. And then when you when you look at young trees, most of the time a young tree is all height and no canopy. So it is important to also kind of acknowledge and understand the way that a tree grows over time. So the young stage of a tree is all about gaining some height to get up into kind of the canopy of other probably trees or surrounding plants near it, to get a little height to start kind of claiming a little piece of sky for itself. And once a tree has gotten some height, so more vertical growth in its early stage and faster because it's trying to get up there, once it's gotten to a certain height, it slows its vertical growth and begins to allow its branches to become slightly more horizontal than the vertical as it begins to develop a canopy, and the canopy is then to sort of shade out the competition around it so that no other tree says, I want to grow here too, because of course trees need their own space. So that early life is an upward, faster growing height habit, and later in life it's more about spreading and developing that canopy. I often say, I grew tall early in my life, and now I'm clearly spreading to develop my canopy as well. So we can kind of really, when you look at a young tree, it's not yet the shape that it ultimately will be. So that's an important thing to kind of consider as we are choosing our trees. Now again, on your list, fringe trees, a really cool tree that is not commonly stocked at garden centers. So Chionanthus, 20 feet tall by 10 feet wide. It's this lovely kind of delicate white fringe of flowers that will slowly mature into a little bit of a kind of bluish black fruit. Birds like the fruit. Some people think it's messy. That might be why you don't see it that often. But a really lovely tree. I did see that some are in stock at our Cedar Hills location. So again, if you're interested in a Chionanthus, come take a look at them. They'll be blooming soon. Then what I also brought in today that are shrubs that are tolerant of or appropriate candidates for making into trees. One that most of us see blooming around town right now, or at least just getting started, and that's this Viburnum opulus. It is in the apple green stage right now, but these flower heads will become larger and white. And you can see a picture right here. I don't know if I can show that very well. Now this plant is often called snowball bush or popcorn bush. And that again is back to the appearance of the flowers that it creates. But you can see that trunk format that would slowly over time make a cool looking tree that would give us a shrub form or multi-trunk form, but ultimately get up to 8 to 10 feet tall. So certainly taller than I can even bring my arms up to. So once it's bigger than us, we tend to think tree. So you want to call that a tree, that's fine with me. Another shrub that we often refer to as a tree is a lilac. And speaking of things that are blooming right now, it's a little early for traditional lilacs to be blooming, but we've had so much warm weather this year that lilacs are already in bloom. And I understand that Helga Kruger, what's her name? The lilac gardens that are famous in Washington, this is like the weekend to go there and see the lilacs in bloom. So check their COVID precautions, but I do believe that the garden is open for visiting. And the kind of European or French lilacs, this is angel white lilac. Obviously not always purple, but lilacs do come in a lot of different colors. The standard European or French lilacs, like this one, are multi-trunked again, so not a single trunk to the shrub itself, but they do end up growing to that 12 to 20 foot tall size range and become quite woody at the base over time as well. So technically you could call a lilac shrub a tree based off of just how big it gets, but you can isolate several of these stalks and thin out the other stalks to give it a more open form and allow it over time to really look more like a standard tree in shape and size as well. Now, when planting trees, a couple of great things to remember. If you do all kinds of research and hunt and look for the right tree, only to finally find it in July, perhaps July is not the best month for planting a tree or multiple trees unless you can give it that deep soaking and establishment watering that is necessary for a tree to become established. Sprinklers typically are not good enough at watering in new plantings and especially trees. So giving it deep watering with the hose, and that may be 20 minutes of a slow trickle from the hose, or even more than that if your tree is larger. And then doing that maybe once or twice a week as the plant is new, and then starting to slowly back off a day or two over time so that your root system can kind of seek further moisture down low in the hole. You may or may not need to stake your tree after you've planted it. Quite a few people had damage on their evergreen magnolias this last winter ice storm that we had, and supporting or staking the magnolia, especially right before a storm such as that, could have helped to reduce or eliminate some of the trees that snapped in half or branches that were severely broken in the ice. When you stake a tree, we have a couple of different options for securing the trees to the stakes, but you want to give it a little bit of space to kind of still blow with the wind so that the tree gets a sense of the weather that it's going to encounter. That helps it to get sturdier roots and thicken its trunk as well. But something such as this chain lock, which is just a flexible tie material, we sell it by the foot, and it just works by kind of inserting into the slot on the lock and turning it so that you get a nice secure. And this comes in two sizes, but holds quite a few things. And like I said, you can just cut it and buy as much as you need. When you dig your hole, whether again it's fall or summer that you're planting, we're on a dry pattern. It's been dry in Oregon. We've got a burn ban right now, and it's April with wildfire watches, and so acknowledging that it's been dry, it's also important. Dig that hole and then fill your hole with water to begin kind of wetting the soil below the planting hole. That also gives you the opportunity to make sure that the hole is well draining and that the water is going away within an hour or two of filling it. And if it's not, then making some other adjustments, or siphoning off a drainage, or planting your tree higher, or even finding a different location to plant that has better drainage than wet feet. The soil amendments that you can add, again, depend on whether you are planting in really heavy clay soil that's not draining well, or if you've got a landscape that's been worked and had soil amendments added or mulch added. If you are digging and you find that your soil is a little heavy or a little clay based, you can add something like our soil building conditioner. 20%, 30% is about as much as I would usually recommend adding to your native soil. So always giving the plant more native soil than something out of a bag, so that it gets used to what it's got to live in. And in the whole, a starter fertilizer is always a great way to get your tree started. Starter fertilizer is, this particular brand is bone meal based, and 352, so more phosphorus for root production, with just a little bit of nitrogen and some nice potassium to kind of help boost its stress levels. The starter fertilizer, even if you might have other fertilizer in the shed or whatever, starter is more like baby food, so it's kind of mild and easy to digest, so to speak, and is definitely something that I recommend for planting. And then the last thing that I really like to plant with, and especially in summer months or with larger specimens that I'm really wanting to encourage to get the roots established as quickly as possible, is to water your plants in with something like a transplant shock reducer. And this is B1, Rootmaster B1, which has a rooting hormone in it. So it actually has a hormone called naphthalene acetic acid, which stimulates the brand new little roots to grow at the ends of your root structure, and also slowly, kind of temporarily slows the canopy growth, the top growth basically of your tree. So it kind of puts the top to sleep and revs up the roots to create a more quickly established plant, and then that slowing up the canopy growth will wear off after about 6 weeks, and then the plant can go ahead and kind of resume its normal growth, but now with that nicer root system that you've established. So this is liquid. It's added, this is concentrate. You add it to a bucket of water, and you're going to water it in by a couple gallons at a time. So I highly recommend Rootmaster B1, and especially in summer planting, but really almost any time of the year is a great time to encourage root growth when you're planting. If there are questions, I will answer those after I sign off here today. And if you are interested in coming and taking a look at any of these trees, you can often find me at the Garden Center. I'm here in Lake Oswego on Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays, or head into any one of our locations and ask to see some of our small garden trees, as well as check our inventory online based on each store's live inventory at www.shop.dennis70s.com. Thank you all for watching today. I hope you enjoyed it. Happy Earth Day and happy gardening.